and by the exceeding smartness of the young ladies, he could not help suspecting that Pavel Pavlovich had been improving the occasion, and that he had, not, of course, in so many words, given to understand that Velkarninov was a single man, dull and disconsolate, and had represented him as likely enough at any moment to change his manner of living and set up an establishment, especially as he had just come in for a considerable inheritance. He thought that Katerina Fedosievna, the eldest girl, 24 years of age, and a splendid girl according to Pavel's description, seemed rather got up to kill from the look of her. She was eminent, even among her well-dressed sisters, for special elegance of costume, and for a certain originality about the make-up of her abundant hair. The rest of the girls all looked as though they were well aware that Velkarninov was making acquaintance with the family for Katie and had come down to have a look at her. Their looks and words all strengthened the impression that they were acting with this supposition in view, as the day went on. Katerina Fedosievna was a fine tall girl, rather plump, and with an extremely pleasing face. She seemed to be of a quiet, if not actually sleepy, disposition. Strange that such a fine girl should be unmarried, thought Velkarninov, as he watched her with much satisfaction. All the sisters were nice-looking, and there were several pretty faces among the friends assembled. Velkarninov was much diverted by the presence of all these young ladies. Nadejda Fedosievna, the schoolgirl and bride-elect of Pavel Pavlovich, had not as yet condescended to appear. Velkarninov awaited her coming with a degree of impatience which surprised and amused him. At last she came, and came with effect, too, accompanied by a lively girl, her friend, Maria Nikitishna, who was considerably older than herself and a very old friend of the family, having been governess in a neighboring house for some years. She was quite one of the family, and boasted of about 23 years of age. She was much esteemed by all the girls, and evidently acted at present as guide, philosopher, and friend to Nadia, Nadejda. Velkarninov saw at the first glance that all the girls were against Pavel Pavlovich, friends and all, and when Nadia came in, it did not take him long to discover that she absolutely hated him. He observed, further, that Pavel Pavlovich either did not, or would not, notice this fact. Nadia was the prettiest of all the girls, a little brunette, with an impudent audacious expression. She might have been a nihilist from the independence of her look. The sly little creature had a pair of flashing eyes and a most charming smile, though as often as not her smile was more full of mischief and wickedness than of amiability. Her lips and teeth were wonders. She was slender but well put together, and the expression of her face was thoughtful though at the same time childish. 15 years old was imprinted in every feature of her face and every motion of her body. It appeared afterwards that Pavel Pavlovich had actually seen the girl for the first time with a little satchel in her hand, coming back from school. She had ceased to carry the satchel since that day. The present brought down by Pavel Pavlovich proved a failure, and was the cause of a very painful impression. Pavel Pavlovich no sooner saw his bride-elect enter the room than he approached her with a broad grin on his face. He gave his present with the preface that he offered it in recognition of the agreeable sensation experienced by him at his last visit upon the occasion of Nadezhda Fedosyevna singing a certain song to the pianoforte, and there he stopped in confusion and stood before her lost and miserable, shoving the jeweler's box into her hand. Nadia, however, would not take the present, and drew her hands away. She approached her mother imperiously. The latter looked much put out, and said aloud, "I won't take it, mother." Nadia was blushing with shame and anger. "Take it and say thank you to Pavel Pavlovitch for it," said her father quietly but firmly. He was very far from pleased. "Quite unnecessary, he muttered to Pavel Pavlovitch. Nadia, seeing there was nothing else to be done, took the case and curtsied, just as children do, giving a little bob down and then a bob up again, as if she had been on springs. One of the sisters came across to look at the present, whereupon Nadia handed it over to her unopened, thereby showing that she did not care so much as to look at it herself. The bracelet was taken out and handed around from one to the other of the company, but all examined it silently, and some even ironically. Only the mother of the family muttered that the bracelet was very pretty. Pavel Pavlovitch would have been delighted to see the earth open and swallow him up. Velkarninov helped the wretched man out of the mess. He suddenly began to talk loudly and eloquently about the first thing that struck him, and before 5 minutes had passed he had won the attention of everyone in the room. He was a wonderfully clever society talker. He had the knack of putting on an air of absolute sincerity, and of impressing his hearers with the belief that he considered them equally sincere. He was able to act the simple, careless, and happy young fellow to perfection. He was a master of the art of interlarding his talk with occasional flashes of real wit, apparently spontaneous but actually prearranged, and very likely stale, in so far that he had himself made the joke before. But today he was particularly successful. He felt that he must talk on and talk well, and he knew that before many moments were past he should succeed in monopolizing all eyes and all ears, that no joke should be laughed at but his own, and no voice heard but his. And sure enough, the spell of his presence seemed to produce a wonderful effect. In a while the talking and laughter became general, with Velkarninov as the center and motor of all. Mrs. Zaklebnikov's kind face lighted up with real pleasure, and Katie's pretty eyes were alight with absolute fascination, while her whole visage glowed with delight. Only Nadia frowned at him, and watched him keenly from beneath her dark lashes. It was clear that she was prejudiced against him. This last fact only roused Velkarninov to greater exertions. The mischievous Maria Nikitishna, however, as Nadia's ally, succeeded in playing off a successful piece of chaff against Velkarninov. She pretended that Pavel Pavlovitch had represented Velkarninov as the friend of his childhood, thereby making the latter out to be some 7 or 8 years older than he really was. Velkarninov liked the look of Maria, notwithstanding. Pavel Pavlovitch was the picture of perplexity. He quite understood the success which his friend was achieving, and at first he felt glad and proud of that success. laughing at the jokes and taking a share of the conversation, but for some reason or other he gradually relapsed into thoughtfulness, and thence into melancholy, which fact was sufficiently plain from the expression of his lugubrious and careworn physiognomy. "Well, my dear fellow, you are the sort of guest one need not exert oneself to entertain," said old Zakhlebnikoff at last, rising and making for his private study, where he had business of importance awaiting his attention, "and I was led to believe that you were the most morose of hypochondriacs. Dear me! What mistakes one does make about other people, to be sure!" There was a grand piano in the room, and Velkarninov suddenly turned to Nadia and remarked, "You sing, don't you?" "Who told you I did?" said Nadia curtly. "Pavel Pavlovitch." "It isn't true, I only sing for a joke, I have no voice." "Oh, but I have no voice either, and yet I sing." "Well, you sing to us first, and then I'll sing," said Nadia, with sparkling eyes. "Not now though, after dinner." "I hate music," she added, "I'm so sick of the piano. We have singing and strumming going on all day here, and Katie is the only one of us all worth hearing." Velkarninov immediately attacked Katie, and besieged her with petitions to play. This attention from him to her eldest daughter so pleased Mamma that she flushed up with satisfaction. Katie went to the piano, blushing like a schoolgirl, and evidently much ashamed of herself for blushing. She played some little piece of Haydn's correctly enough but without much expression. When she had finished, Velkarninov praised the music warmly, Haydn's music generally, and this little piece in particular. He looked at Katie too, with admiration, and his expression seemed to say, "By Jove, you're a fine girl." So eloquent was his look that everyone in the room was able to read it, and especially Katie herself. "What a pretty garden you have," said Velkarninov after a short pause, looking through the glass doors of the balcony. "Let's all go out, may we?" "Oh, yes, do let's go out," cried several voices together. He seemed to have hit upon the very thing most desired by all. So they all adjourned into the garden, and walked about there until dinner time, and Velkarninov had the opportunity of making closer acquaintance with some of the girls of the establishment. 2 or 3 young fellows dropped in from the neighboring houses, a student, a schoolboy, and another young fellow of about 20 in a pair of huge spectacles. Each of these young fellows immediately attached himself to the particular young lady of his choice. The young man in spectacles no sooner arrived than he went aside with Nadia and Maria Nikitishna, and entered into an animated whispering conversation with them, with much frowning and impatience of manner. This gentleman seemed to consider it his mission to treat Pavel Pavlovitch with the most ineffable contempt. Some of the girls proposed a game. One of them suggested proverbs, but it was voted dull. Another suggested acting, but the objection was made that they never knew how to finish off. "It may be more successful with you," said Nadia to Velkarninov confidentially. "You know we all thought you were Pavel Pavlovitch's friend, but it appears that he was only boasting. I am very glad you have come, for a certain reason," she added, looking knowingly into Velkarninov's face, and then retreating back again to Maria's wing, blushing. "We'll play proverbs in the evening," said another, "and we'll all chaff Pavel Pavlovitch. You must help us too." "We are so glad you're come, it's so dull here as a rule," said a third, a funny-looking red-haired girl, whose face was comically hot, with running apparently. Goodness knows where she had dropped from. Velkarninov had not observed her arrive. Pavel Pavlovitch's agitation increased every moment. Meanwhile Velkarninov took the opportunity of making great friends with Nadia. She had ceased to frown at him as before, and had now developed the wildest of spirits, dancing and jumping about, singing and whistling, and occasionally even catching hold of his hand in her innocent friendliness. She was very happy indeed, apparently, but she took no more notice of Pavel Pavlovitch than if he had not been there at all. Pavel Pavlovitch was very jealous of all this, and once or twice when Nadia and Velkarninov talked apart, he joined them and rudely interrupted their conversation by interposing his anxious face between them. Katia could not help being fully aware by this time that their charming guest had not come in for her sake, as had been believed by the family. Indeed, it was clear that Nadia interested him so much that she excluded everyone else, to a considerable extent, from his attention. However, in spite of this, her good-natured face retained its amiability of expression all the same. She seemed to be happy enough witnessing the happiness of the rest and listening to the merry talk. She could not take a large share in the conversation herself, poor girl. "What a fine girl your sister, Katerina Fedosyevna is," remarked Velkarninov to Nadia. "Katia? I should think so. There is no better girl in the world. She's our family angel. I'm in love with her myself," replied Nadia enthusiastically. At last, dinner was announced, and a very good dinner it was, several courses being added for the benefit of the guests. A bottle of Tokay made its appearance, and champagne was handed round in honor of the occasion. The good humor of the company was general. Old Zaklebnikov was in high spirits, having partaken of an extra glass of wine this evening. So infectious was the hilarity that even Pavel Pavlovitch took heart of grace and made a pun. From the end of the table where he sat beside the lady of the house, there suddenly came a loud laugh from the delighted girls who had been fortunate enough to hear the virgin attempt. "Papa, Papa, Pavel Pavlovitch has made a joke," cried several at once. "He says that there is quite a galaxy of gals here." "Aho, he's made a pun too, has he?" cried the old fellow. "Well, what is it? Let's have it." He turned to Pavel Pavlovitch with beaming face, prepared to roar over the latter's joke. "Why, I tell you, he says there's quite a galaxy of gals." "Well, go on, where's the joke?" repeated Papa, still dense to the merits of the pun, but beaming more and more with benevolent desire to see it. "Oh, Papa, how stupid you are not to see it. Why, gals and galaxy, don't you see? He says there's quite a galaxy of gals." "Oh, oh," guffawed the old gentleman, "ha ha. Well, We'll hope he'll make a better one next time, that's all. Pavel Pavlovich can't acquire all the perfections at once, said Maria Nikitishna. Oh, my goodness, he's swallowed a bone, look, she added, jumping up from her chair. The alarm was general, and Maria's delight was great. Poor Pavel Pavlovich had only choked over a glass of wine, which he seized and drank to hide his confusion, but Maria declared that it was a fish bone, that she had seen it herself, and that people had been known to die of swallowing a bone just like that. "Clap him on the back," cried somebody. It appeared that there were numerous kind friends ready to perform this friendly office, and poor Pavel protested in vain that it was nothing but a common choke. The belabouring went on until the coughing fit was over, and it became evident that mischievous Maria was at the bottom of it all. After dinner old Mr. Zaklebnikov retired for his post-prandial nap, bidding the young people enjoy themselves in the garden as best they might. "You enjoy yourself, too," he added to Pavel Pavlovich, tapping the latter's shoulder affably as he went by. When the party were all collected in the garden once more, Pavel suddenly approached Velkarninov. One moment he whispered, pulling the latter by the coat sleeve. The two men went aside into a lonely bypath. "None of that here, please, I won't allow it here," said Pavel Pavlovich in a choking whisper. "None of what?" "Who?" asked Velkarninov, staring with all his eyes. Pavel Pavlovich said nothing more, but gazed furiously at his companion, his lips trembling in a desperate attempt at a pretended smile. At this moment the voices of several of the girls broke in upon them, calling them to some game. Velkarninov shrugged his shoulders and rejoined the party. Pavel followed him. "I'm sure Pavel Pavlovich was borrowing a handkerchief from you, wasn't he? He forgot his handkerchief last time too." "Pavel Pavlovich has forgotten his handkerchief again, and he has a cold as usual," cried Maria. "Oh, Pavel Pavlovich, why didn't you say so?" cried Mrs. Zaklebnikov, making towards the house. "You shall have one at once." In vain poor Pavel protested that he had two of those necessary articles, and was not suffering from a cold. Mrs. Zaklebnikov was glad of the excuse for retiring to the house, and heard nothing. A few moments afterwards a maid pursued Pavel with a handkerchief, to the confusion of the latter gentleman. A game of proverbs was now proposed. All sat down, and the young man with spectacles was made to retire to a considerable distance and wait there with his nose close up against the wall and his back turned until the proverb should have been chosen and the words arranged. Velkarninov was the next in turn to be the questioner. Then the cry arose for Pavel Pavlovich, and the latter, who had more or less recovered his good humor by this time, proceeded to the spot indicated, and, resolved to do his duty like a man, took his stand with his nose to the wall, ready to stay there motionless until called. The red-haired young lady was detailed to watch him, in case of fraud on his part. No sooner, however, had the wretched Pavel taken up his position at the wall, than the whole party took to their heels and ran away as fast as their legs could carry them. "Run quick," whispered the girls to Velkarninov, in despair, for he had not started with them. "Why, what's happened?" "What's the matter?" asked the latter, keeping up as best he could. "Don't make a noise, we want to get away and let him go on standing there, that's all." Katya, it appeared, did not like this practical joke. When the last stragglers of the party arrived at the end of the garden, among them Velkarninov, the latter found Katya angrily scolding the rest of the girls. "Very well," she was saying, "I won't tell mother this time, but I shall go away myself, it's too bad. What will the poor fellow's feelings be, standing all alone there, and finding us fled?" And off she went. The rest, however, were entirely unsympathizing, and enjoyed the joke thoroughly. Velkarninov was entreated to appear entirely unconscious when Pavel Pavlovitch should appear again, just as though nothing whatever had happened. It was a full quarter of an hour before Pavel put in an appearance. 2/3, at least, of that time he must have stood at the wall. When he reached the party he found everyone busy over a game of gorilki, laughing and shouting and making themselves thoroughly happy. Wild with rage, Pavel Pavlovitch again made straight for Velkarninov, and tugged him by the coat sleeve. "One moment, sir." "Oh, my goodness, he's always coming in with his one moments," said someone. "A handkerchief wanted again probably," shouted someone else after the pair as they retired. "Come now, this time it was you. You were the originator of this insult," muttered Pavel, his teeth chattering with fury. Velkarninov interrupted him, and strongly recommended Pavel to bestir himself to be merrier. "You are chaffed because you get angry," he said. "If you try to be jolly instead of sulky you'll be let alone." To his surprise these words impressed Pavel deeply. He was quiet at once, and returned to the party with a guilty air, and immediately began to take part in the games engaged in once more. He was not further bullied at present, and within half an hour his good humor seemed quite re-established. To Velkarninov's astonishment, however, he never seemed to presume to speak to Nadia, although he kept as close to her, on all occasions, as he possibly could. He seemed to take his position as quite natural, and was not put out by her contemptuous air towards him. Pavel Pavlovitch was teased once more, however, before the evening ended. A game of hide-and-seek was commenced, and Pavel had hidden in a small room in the house. Being observed entering there by someone, he was locked in, and left there raging for an hour. Meanwhile, Velkarninov learned the special reason for Nadia's joy at his arrival. Maria conducted him to a lonely alley, where Nadia was awaiting him alone. "I have quite convinced myself," began the latter, when they were left alone, "that you are not nearly so great a friend of Pavel Pavlovitch as he gave us to understand. I have also convinced myself that you alone can perform a certain great service for me. Here is his horrid bracelet." She drew the case out of her pocket. "I wish to ask you to be so kind as to return it to him. I cannot do so myself, because I am quite determined never to speak to him again all my life. You can tell him so from me, and better add that he is not to worry me with any more of his nasty presents. I'll let him know something else I have to say through other channels. Will you do this for me? Oh, for goodness sake, spare me, cried Velkarninov, almost wringing his hands. How spare you? Cried poor Nadia. Her artificial tone put on for the occasion had collapsed at once before this check, and she was nearly crying. Velkarninov burst out laughing. I don't mean, I should be delighted, you know, but the thing is, I have my own accounts to settle with him. I knew you weren't his friend, and that he was lying. I shall never marry him, never. You may rely on that. I don't understand how he could dare. At all events, you really must give him back this horrid bracelet. What am I to do if you don't? I must have it given back to him this very day. He'll catch it if he interferes with father about me. At this moment the spectacled young gentleman issued from the shrubs at their elbow. You are bound to return the bracelet, he burst out furiously, upon Velkarninov, if only out of respect to the rights of women. He did not finish the sentence, for Nadia pulled him away from beside Velkarninov with all her strength. How stupid you are, she cried, go away. How dare you listen? I told you to stand a long way off. She stamped her foot with rage, and for some while after the young fellow had slunk away she continued to walk along with flashing eyes, furious with indignation. You wouldn't believe how stupid he is, she cried at last. You laugh, but think of my feelings. That's not he, is it? Laughed Velkarninov. Of course not. How could you imagine such a thing? It's only his friend, and how he can choose such friends I can't understand. They say he is a future motive power, but I don't see it. Alexey Ivanovich, for the last time, I have no one else to ask, will you give the bracelet back or not? Very well, I will. Give it to me. Oh, you dear, good Alexey Ivanovich, thanks, she cried, enthusiastic with delight. I'll sing all the evening for that. I sing beautifully, you know. I was telling you a wicked story before dinner. Oh, I wish you would come down here again, I'd tell you all, then, and lots of other things besides, for you are a dear, kind, good fellow, like Katia. And sure enough, when they reached home she sat down and sang a couple of songs in a voice which, though entirely untrained, was of great natural sweetness and considerable strength. When the party returned from the garden they had found Pavel Pavlovich drinking tea with the old folks on the balcony. He had probably been talking on serious topics, as he was to take his departure the day after tomorrow for 9 months. He never so much as glanced at Velkarninov and the rest when they entered, but he evidently had not complained to the authorities, and all was quiet as yet. But, when Nadia began to sing, he came in. Nadia did not answer a single one of his questions, but he did not seem offended by this, and took his stand behind her chair. Once there, his whole appearance gave it to be understood that that was his own place by right, and that he allowed none to dispute it. "It's Alexey Ivanovitch's turn to sing now," cried the girls, when Nadia's song was finished, and all crowded round to hear Velkaninov, who sat down to accompany himself. He chose a song of Glink's, too much neglected nowadays. It ran, "When from your merry lips tenderness flows," and Velkaninov seemed to address the words to Nadia exclusively, but the whole party stood around him. His voice had long since gone the way of all flesh, but it was clear that he must have had a good one once, and it so happened that Velkaninov had heard this particular song many years ago, from Glinky's own lips, when a student at the university, and remembered the great effect that it had made upon him when he first heard it. The song was full of the most intense passion of expression, and Velkaninov sang it well, with his eyes fixed upon Nadia. Amid the applause that followed the completion of the performance, Pavel Pavlovich came forward, seized Nadia's hand and drew her away from the proximity of Velkaninov. He then returned to the latter at the piano, and, with every evidence of frantic rage, whispered to him, his lips all of a tremble, "One moment with you." Velkaninov, seeing that the man was capable of worse things in his then frame of mind, took Pavel's hand and led him out through the balcony into the garden, quite dark now. "Do you understand, sir, that you must come away at once, this very minute?" said Pavel Pavlovich. "No, sir, I do not." "Do you remember," continued Pavel in his frenzied whisper, "do you remember that you begged me to tell you all, everything, down to the smallest details? Well, the time has come for telling you all. Come." Velkaninov considered a moment, glanced once more at Pavel Pavlovich, and consented to go. "Oh, stay and have another cup of tea," said Mrs. Zaklebnikov, when this decision was announced. "Pavel Pavlovich, why are you taking Alexey Ivanovich away?" cried the girls, with angry looks. As for Nadia, she looked so cross with Pavel, that the latter felt absolutely uncomfortable, but he did not give in. "Oh, but I am very much obliged to Pavel Pavlovich," said Velkaninov, "for reminding me of some most important business which I must attend to this very evening, and which I might have forgotten," laughed Velkaninov, as he shook hands with his host and made his bow to the ladies, especially to Katia, as the family thought. "You must come again soon," said the host. "We have been so glad to see you, it was so good of you to come." "Yes, so glad," said the lady of the house. "Do come again soon," cried the girls, as Pavel Pavlovich and Velkaninov took their seats in the carriage. "Alexey Ivanovich, do come back soon." And with these voices in their ears they drove away. Chapter 13. In spite of Velkaninov's apparently happy day, the feeling of annoyance and suffering at his heart had hardly actually left him for a single moment. Before he sang the song he had not known what to do with himself, or suppressed anger and melancholy. Perhaps that was the reason why he had sung with so much feeling and passion. "To think that I could so have lowered myself as to forget everything," he thought, and then despised himself for thinking it. "It is more humiliating still to cry over what is done," he continued. far better to fly into a passion with someone instead. Fool, he muttered, looking askance at Pavel Pavlovich, who sat beside him as still as a mouse. Pavel Pavlovich preserved a most obstinate silence, probably concentrating and ranging his energies. He occasionally took his hat off, impatiently, and wiped the perspiration from his forehead. Once, and once only, Pavel spoke. To the coachman, he asked whether there was going to be a thunderstorm. "Whew," said the man, "I should think so. It's been a steamy day, just the day for it." By the time town was reached, 10:30, the whole sky was overcast. "I am coming to your house," said Pavel to Velkarninov, when almost at the door. "Quite so, but I warn you, I feel very unwell tonight." "All right, I won't stay too long." When the two men passed under the gateway, Pavel Pavlovich disappeared into the dvornik's room for a minute, to speak to Mavra. "What did you go in there for?" asked Velkarninov severely as they mounted the stairs and reached his own door. "Oh, nothing, nothing at all, just to tell them about the coachman. Very well. Mind, I shall not allow you to drink." Pavel Pavlovich did not answer. Velkarninov lit a candle, while Pavel threw himself into a chair, then the former came and stood menacingly before him. "I may have told you I should have my last word to say tonight, as well as you," he said with suppressed anger in his voice and manner. "Here it is. I consider conscientiously that things are square between you and me, now, and therefore there is no more to be said, understand me, about anything. Since this is so, had you not better go, and let me close the door after you?" "Let's cry quits first, Alexey Ivanovich," said Pavel Pavlovich, gazing into Velkarninov's eyes with great sweetness. "Quits?" cried the latter, in amazement. "You strange man, what are we to cry quits about? Are you harping upon your promise of a last word?" "Yes." "Oh, well, we have nothing more to cry quits for." "We have been quits long since," said Velkarninov. "Dear me, do you really think so?" cried Pavel Pavlovich, in a shrill, sharp voice, pressing his two hands tightly together, finger to finger, as he held them up before his breast. Velkarninov said nothing. He rose from his seat and began to walk up and down the room. The word Lisa resounded through and through his soul like the voice of a bell. "Well, what is there that you still consider unsettled between us?" he asked at last, looking angrily at Pavel, who had never ceased to follow him with his eyes, always holding his hands before his breast, fingertip to fingertip. "Don't go down there any more," said Pavel, almost in a whisper, and rising from his seat with every indication of humble entreaty. "What, is that all?" cried Velkarninov, bursting into an angry laugh. "Good heavens, man, you have done nothing but surprise me all day." He had begun in a tone of exasperation, but he now abruptly changed both voice and expression, and continued with an air of deep feeling. "Listen," he said, "listen to me. I don't think I have ever felt so deeply humiliated as I am feeling now, in consequence of the events of today. In the first place, that I should have condescended to go down with you at all, and in the second place, all that happened there. It has been such a day of pettifogging, pitiful pettifogging. I have profaned and lowered myself by taking a share in it all, and forgetting, well, it's done now. But look here, you fell upon me today, unawares, upon a sick man. Oh, you needn't excuse yourself, at all events I shall certainly not go there again. I have not the slightest interest in so doing, he concluded, with an air of decision. No, really, cried Pavel Pavlovitch, making no secret of his delight and exultation. Velkarninov glanced contemptuously at him, and recommenced his march up and down the room. You have determined to be happy under any circumstances, I suppose, he observed, after a pause. He could not resist making the remark disdainfully. Yes, I have, said Pavel, quietly. It's no business of mine that he's a fool and a knave, out of pure idiocy, thought Velkarninov. I can't help hating him, though I feel that he is not even worth hating. I'm a permanent husband, said Pavel Pavlovitch, with the most exquisitely servile irony, at his own expense. I remember you using that expression, Alexey Ivanovitch, long ago, when you were with us at tea. I remember many of your original phrases of that time, and when you spoke of permanent husbands the other day, I recollected the expression. At this point Mavra entered the room with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. Forgive me, Alexey Ivanovitch, said Pavel, you know I can't get on without it. Don't consider it an audacity on my part, think of it as a mere bit of byplay unworthy your notice. Well, consented Velkarninov, with a look of disgust, but I must remind you that I don't feel well, and that, one little moment, I'll go at once, I really will, I must just drink 1 glass, my throat is so. He seized the bottle eagerly, and poured himself out a glass, drank it greedily at a gulp, and sat down. He looked at Velkarninov almost tenderly. What a nasty-looking beast, muttered the latter to himself. It's all her friends that make her like that, said Pavel, suddenly, with animation. What? Oh, you refer to the lady. And, besides, she is so very young still, you see, resumed Pavel. I shall be her slave, she shall see a little society, and a bit of the world. She will change, sir, entirely. I mustn't forget to give him back the bracelet, by the by, thought Velkarninov, frowning, as he felt for the case in his coat pocket. You said just now that I am determined to be happy, Alexey Ivanovitch, continued Pavel, confidentially, and with almost touching earnestness. I must marry, else what will become of me? You see for yourself, he pointed to the bottle, and that's only 100th part of what I demean myself to nowadays. I cannot get on without marrying again, sir, I must have a new faith. If I can but believe in someone again, sir, I shall rise, I shall be saved. Why are you telling me all this? Exclaimed Velkarninov, very nearly laughing in his face, it seemed so absurdly inconsistent. Look here, he continued, roaring the words out, let me know now, once for all, why did you drag me down there? What good was I to do you there? I wished to try, began Pavel, with some confusion. Try what? The effect, sir. You see, Alexey Ivanovich, I have only been visiting there a week. He grew more and more confused, and yesterday, when I met you, I thought to myself that I had never seen her yet in society, that is, in the society of other men besides myself. A stupid idea, I know it is. I was very anxious to try, you know my wretchedly jealous nature. He suddenly raised his head and blushed violently. He can't be telling me the truth, thought Velkarninov. He was struck dumb with surprise. Well, go on, he muttered at last. Well, I see it was all her pretty childish nature, sir, that and her friends together. You must forgive my stupid conduct towards yourself today, Alexey Ivanovich. I will never do it again, never again, sir, I assure you. I shall never be there to give you the opportunity, replied Velkarninov with a laugh. That's partly why I say it, said Pavel. Oh, come. I'm not the only man in the world, you know, said the other irritably. I am sorry to hear you say that, Alexey Ivanovich. My esteem for Nadejda is such that forgive me, forgive me. I meant nothing, I assure you. Only it surprises me that you should have expected so much of me, that you trusted me so completely. I trusted you entirely, sir, solely on account of all that has passed. So that you still consider me the most honorable of men. Velkarninov paused. The naive nature of his sudden question surprised even himself. I always did think you that, sir, said Pavel, hanging his head. Of course, quite so, I didn't mean quite that. I wanted to say, in spite of all prejudices you may have formed, yes, in spite of all prejudices. And when you first came to Petersburg, asked Velkarninov, who himself felt the monstrosity of his own inquisitive questions, but could not resist putting them. I considered you the most honorable of men when I first came to Petersburg, sir, no less. I always respected you, Alexey Ivanovich. Pavel Pavlovich raised his eyes and looked at his companion without the smallest trace of confusion. Velkarninov suddenly felt cowed and afraid. He was anxious that nothing should result, nothing disagreeable, from this conversation, since he himself was responsible for having initiated it. I loved you, Alexey Ivanovich, all that year at tea, I loved you. You did not observe it, continued Pavel Pavlovich, his voice trembling with emotion, to the great discomfiture of his companion. You did not observe my affection, because I was too lowly a being to deserve any sort of notice, but it was unnecessary that you should observe my love. Well, sir, and all these 9 years I have thought of you, for I have never known such a year of life as that year was. Pavel's eyes seemed to have a special glare in them at this point. I remembered many of your sayings and expressions, sir, and I thought of you always as a man imbued with the loftiest sentiments, and gifted with knowledge and intellect, sir, of the highest order, a man of grand ideas. great ideas do not proceed so frequently from greatness of intellect, as from elevation of taste and feeling. You yourself said that, sir, once. I dare say you have forgotten the fact, but you did say it. Therefore I always thought of you, sir, as a man of taste and feeling, consequently I concluded, consequently I trusted you, in spite of everything. Pavel Pavlovich's chin suddenly began to tremble. Velkarninov was frightened out of his wits. This unexpected tone must be put an end to at all hazards. Enough, Pavel Pavlovich, he said softly, blushing violently and with some show of irritation. And why, Velkarninov suddenly began to shout passionately, why do you come hanging round the neck of a sick man, a worried man, a man who is almost out of his wits with fever and annoyance of all sorts, and drag him into this abyss of lies and mirage and vision and shame, and unnatural, disproportionate, distorted nonsense? Yes, sir, that's the most shameful part of the whole business, the disproportionate nonsense of what you say. You know it's all humbug, both of us are mean wretches, both of us, and if you like I'll prove to you at once that not only you don't love me, but that you loathe and hate me with all your heart, and that you are a liar, whether you know it or not. You took me down to see your bride, not a bit in the world to try how she would behave in the society of other men. Absurd idea, you simply saw me, yesterday, and your vile impulse led you to carry me off there in order that you might show me the girl, and say, as it were, there, look at that. She's to be mine. Try your hand there if you can. It was nothing but your challenge to me. You may not have known it, but this was so, as I say, and you felt the impulse which I have described. Such a challenge could not be made without hatred, consequently you hate me. Velkarninov almost rushed up and down the room as he shouted the above words, and with every syllable the humiliating consciousness that he was allowing himself to descend to the level of Pavel Pavlovich afflicted him and tormented him more and more. I was only anxious to be at peace with you, Alexey Ivanovich, said Pavel sadly, his chin and lips working again. Velkarninov flew into a violent rage, as if he had been insulted in the most unexampled manner. I tell you once more, sir, he cried, that you have attached yourself to a sick and irritated man, in order that you may surprise him into saying something unseemly in his madness. We are, I tell you, man, we are men of different worlds. Understand me. Between us two there is a grave, he hissed in his fury, and stopped. And how do you know, sir, cried Pavel Pavlovich, his face suddenly becoming all twisted, and deadly white to look at, as he strode up to Velkarninov, how do you know what that grave means to me, sir, here? He beat his breast with terrible earnestness, droll though he looked. Yes, sir, we both stand on the brink of the grave, but on my side there is more, sir, than on yours. Yes, more, he hissed, beating his breast without pause, more than on yours. The grave means more to me than to you. But at this moment a loud ring at the bell brought both men to their senses. Someone was ringing so loud that the bell wire was in danger of snapping. "People don't ring like that for me," observed Velkarninov angrily. "No more they do for me, sir." "I assure you they don't," said Pavel Pavlovich anxiously. He had become the quiet, timid Pavel again in a moment. Velkarninov frowned and went to open the door. "Mr. Velkarninov, if I am not mistaken," said a strange voice, apparently belonging to some young and very self-satisfied person, at the door. "What is it?" "I have been informed that Mr. Trusotsky is at this moment in your rooms. I must see him at once." Velkarninov felt inclined to send this self-satisfied-looking young gentleman flying downstairs again, but he reflected, refrained, stood aside and let him in. "Here is Mr. Trusotsky. Come in." Chapter 14. A young fellow of some 19 summers entered the room. He might have been even younger, to judge by his handsome but self-satisfied and very juvenile face. He was not badly dressed, at all events his clothes fitted him well. In stature he was a little above the middle height, he had thick black hair, and dark, bold eyes, and these were the striking features of his face. Unfortunately his nose was a little too broad and tip-tilted, otherwise he would have been a really remarkably good-looking young fellow. He came in with some pretension. "I believe I have the opportunity of speaking to Mr. Trusotsky," he observed deliberately, and bringing out the word opportunity with much apparent satisfaction, as though he wished to accentuate the fact that he could not possibly be supposed to feel either honor or pleasure in meeting Mr. Trusotsky. Velkarninov thought he knew what all this meant. Pavel Pavlovich seemed to have an inkling of the state of affairs, too. His expression was one of anxiety, but he did not show the white feather. "Not having the honor of your acquaintance," he said with dignity, "I do not understand what sort of business you can have with me. Kindly listen to me first, and you can then let me know your ideas on the subject," observed the young gentleman, pulling out his tortoise-shell glasses, and focusing the champagne bottle with them. Having deliberately inspected that object, he put up his glasses again, and fixing his attention once more upon Pavel Pavlovich, remarked, "Alexander Lobov." "What about Alexander Lobov?" "That's my name." "You've not heard of me?" "No hm. Well, I don't know when you should have, now I think of it, but I've come on important business concerning yourself. I suppose I can sit down?" "I'm tired." "Oh, pray sit down," said Velkarninov, but not before the young man had taken a chair. In spite of the pain at his heart, Velkarninov could not help being interested in this impudent youngling. There seemed to be something in his good-looking, fresh young face that reminded him of Nadia. "You can sit down too," observed Lobov, indicating an empty seat to Pavel Pavlovich, with a careless nod of his head. "Thank you, I shall stand." "Very well, but you'll soon get tired." "You need not go away, I think, Mr. Velkarninov." "I have nowhere to go to, my good sir, I am at home." "As you like, I confess I should prefer your being present while I have an explanation with this gentleman. Nadejda Fedosyevna has given you a flattering enough character, sir, to me. Nonsense, how could she have had time to do so? Immediately after you left. Now, Mr. Trusotsky, this is what I wish to observe, he continued to Pavel, the latter still standing in front of him. We, that is Nadejda Fedosyevna and myself, have long loved one another, and have plighted our troth. You have suddenly come between us as an obstruction. I have come to tell you that you had better clear out of the way at once. Are you prepared to adopt my suggestion? Pavel Pavlovitch took a step backward in amazement, his face paled visibly, but in a moment a spiteful smile curled his lip. Not in the slightest degree prepared, sir, he said, laconically. Dear me, said the young fellow, settling himself comfortably in his chair, and throwing one leg over the other. Indeed, I do not know whom I am speaking to, added Pavel Pavlovitch, so that it can't hardly be worth your while to continue. So saying he sat down at last. I said you'd get tired, remarked the youth. I informed you just now, he added, that my name is Alexander Lobov, and that Nadejda and I have plighted our troth. Consequently you cannot truthfully say, as you did say just now, that you don't know who I am, nor can you honestly assert that you do not see what we can have to talk about. Not to speak of myself, there is Nadejda Fedosyevna to be considered, the lady to whom you have so impudently attached yourself. That alone is matter sufficient for explanation between us. All this the young fellow rattled off carelessly enough, as if the thing were so self-evident that it hardly needed mentioning. While talking, he raised his eyeglass once more, and inspected some object for an instant, putting the glass back in his pocket immediately afterwards. Excuse me, young man, began Pavel Pavlovitch, but the words young man were fatal. At any other moment, observed the youth, I should of course forbid your calling me young man at once, but you must admit that in this case my youth is my principal advantage over yourself, and that even this very day you would have given anything, nay, at the moment when you presented your bracelet, to be just a little bit younger. Cheeky young brat, muttered Velkarninov. In any case, began Pavel Pavlovitch, with dignity, I do not consider your reasons as set forth, most questionable and improper reasons at the best, sufficient to justify the continuance of this conversation. I see your business is mere childishness and nonsense. Tomorrow I shall have the pleasure of an explanation with Mr. Zaklebnikov, my respected friend. Meanwhile, sir, perhaps you will make it convenient to depart. That's the sort of man he is, cried the youth, hotly, turning to Velkarninov. He is not content with being as good as kicked out of the place, and having faces made at him, but he must go down again tomorrow to carry tales about us to Mr. Zaklebnikov. Do you not prove by this, you obstinate man, that you wish to carry off the young lady by force? That you desire to buy her of people who preserve, thanks to the relics of barbarism still triumphant among us, a species of power over her? Surely she showed you sufficiently clearly that she despises you. You have had your wretched tasteless present of today, that bracelet thing, returned to you. What more do you want? Excuse me, no bracelet has been, or can be returned to me, said Pavel Pavlovitch, with a shudder of anxiety. However. How so? Hasn't Mr. Velkarninov given it to you? Oh, the deuce take you, sir, thought Velkarninov. Nadejda Fedosyevna certainly did give me this case for you. Pavel Pavlovitch, he said, I did not wish to take it, but she was anxious that I should. Here it is, I'm very sorry. He took out the case and laid it down on the table before the enraged Pavel Pavlovitch. How is it you have not handed it to him before? Asked the young man severely. I had no time, as you may conclude, said Velkarninov with a frown. Strange circumstance. What, sir? Well, you must admit it is strange. However, I am quite prepared to believe that there has been some mistake. Velkarninov would have given worlds to get up and drub the impertinent young rascal and drag him out of the house by the ear, but he could not contain himself, and burst out laughing. The boy immediately followed suit and laughed too. But for Pavel Pavlovitch it was no laughing matter. If Velkarninov had seen the ferocious look which the former cast at him at the moment when he and Lobov laughed, he would have realized that Pavel Pavlovitch was in the act of passing a fatal limit of forbearance. He did not see the look, but it struck him that it was only fair to stand up for Pavel now. Listen, Mr. Lobov, he said, in friendly tones, not to enter into the consideration of other matters, I may point out that Mr. Trusotsky brings with him, in his wooing of Miss Zaklebnikov, a name and circumstances fully well known to that esteemed family. In the second place, he brings a fairly respectable position in the world, and thirdly, he brings wealth. Therefore he may well be surprised to find himself confronted by such a rival as yourself, a gentleman of great wealth, doubtless, but at the same time so very young, that he could not possibly look upon you as a serious rival. Therefore, again, he is quite right in begging you to bring the conversation to an end. What do you mean by so very young? I was 19 a month since. By the law I might have been married long ago. That's a sufficient answer to your argument. But what father would consent to allowing his daughter to marry you now, even though you may be a Rothschild to come, or a benefactor to humanity in the future? A man of 19 years old is not capable of answering for himself, and yet you are ready to take on your own responsibility another being, in other words, a being who is as much a child as you are yourself. Why, it is hardly even honorable on your part, is it? I have presumed to address you thus, because you yourself referred the matter to me as a sort of arbiter between yourself and Pavel Pavlovitch. Yes, by the by, Pavel Pavlovitch, I forgot he was called that, remarked the youth. I wonder why I thought of him all along as Vasily Petrovitch. Look here, sir, addressing Velkarninov, you have not surprised me in the least. I knew you were all tarred with one brush. It is strange that you should have been described to me as a man of some originality. However, to business. All that you have said is, of course, utter nonsense. Not only is there nothing dishonorable about my intentions, as you permitted yourself to suggest, but the fact of the matter is entirely the reverse, as I hope to prove to you by and by. In the first place, we have promised each other marriage, besides which I have given her my word that if she ever repents of her promise she shall have her full liberty to throw me over. I have given her surety to that effect before witnesses. I bet anything your friend, what's his name, Pridpozelov invented that idea, cried Velkarninov. He, giggled Pavel Pavlovich contemptuously. What is that person giggling about? You are right, sir, it was Pridpozelov's idea. But I don't think you and I quite understand one another, do we? And I had such a good report of you. How old are you? Are you 50 yet? Stick to business, if you please. Forgive the liberty. I did not mean anything offensive. Well, to proceed. I am no millionaire, and I am no great benefactor to humanity, to reply to your arguments, but I shall manage to keep myself and my wife. Of course I have nothing now. I was brought up, in fact, in their house from my childhood. How so? Oh, because I am a distant relative of this Mr. Zaklebnikov's wife. When my people died, he took me in and sent me to school. The old fellow is really quite a kind-hearted man, if you only knew it. I do know it. Yes, he's an old fogey rather, but a kind-hearted old fellow, but I left him 4 months ago and began to keep myself. I first joined a railway office at 10 rubles a month, and am now in a notary's place at 25. I made him a formal proposal for her a fortnight since. He first laughed like mad, and afterwards fell into a violent rage, and Nadia was locked up. She bore it heroically. He had been furious with me before for throwing up a post in his department which he procured for me. You see, he is a good and kind old fellow at home, but get him in his office and, oh, my word, he's a sort of Jupiter Tonans. I told him straight out that I didn't like his ways, but the great rowers, thanks to the second chief at the office, he said I insulted him, but I only told him he was an ignorant beggar. So I threw them all up, and went in for the notary business. Listen to that. What a clap! We shall have a thunderstorm directly. What a good thing I arrived before the rain. I came here on foot, you know, all the way, nearly at a run, too. How in the world did you find an opportunity of speaking to Miss Nadia then, especially since you are not allowed to meet? Oh, one can always get over the railing. Then there's that red-haired girl, she helps, and Maria Nikitishna, oh, but she's a snake, that girl. What's the matter? Are you afraid of the thunderstorm? No, I'm ill, seriously ill. Velkarninov had risen from his seat with a fearful sudden pain in his chest, and was trying to walk up and down the room. Oh, really, then I'm disturbing you. I shall go at once, said the youth, jumping up. No, you don't disturb me, said Velkarninov ceremoniously. How not? Of course I do, if you've got the stomach ache. Well now, Vasily, what's your name? Pavel Pavlovich, let's conclude this matter. I will formulate my question for once into words which will adapt themselves to your understanding. Are you prepared to renounce your claim to the hand of Nadezhda Fedosyevna before her parents, and in my presence, with all due formality? No, sir, not in the slightest degree prepared, said Pavel Pavlovich witheringly, and allow me to say once more that all this is childish and absurd, and that you had better clear out. Take care, said the youth, holding up a warning forefinger. Better give it up now, for I warn you that otherwise you will spend a lot of money down there, and take a lot of trouble, and when you come back in 9 months you will be turned out of the house by Nadezhda Fedosyevna herself, and if you don't go then, it will be the worse for you. Excuse me for saying so, but at present you are like the dog in the manger. Think over it, and be sensible for once in your life. Spare me the moral, if you please, began Pavel Pavlovich furiously, and as for your low threats I shall take my measures tomorrow, serious measures. Low threats, pooh! You are low yourself to take them as such. Very well, I'll wait till tomorrow then, but if there's the thunder again, au revoir, very glad to have met you, sir. He nodded to Velkarninov and made off hurriedly, evidently anxious to reach home before the rain. Chapter 15. You see, cried Pavel to Velkarninov, the instant that the young fellow's back was turned. Yes, you are not going to succeed there, said Velkarninov. He would not have been so abrupt and careless of Pavel's feelings if it had not been for the dreadful pain in his chest. Pavel Pavlovich shuddered as though from a sudden scald. Well, sir, and you were loath to give me back the bracelet, eh? I hadn't time. Oh, you were sorry, you pitied me, as true friend pities friend. Oh, well, I pitied you, then. Velkarninov was growing angrier every moment. However, he informed Pavel Pavlovich shortly as to how he had received the bracelet, and how Nadia had almost forced it upon him. You must understand, he added, that otherwise I should never have agreed to accept the commission. There are quite enough disagreeables already. You liked the job, and accepted it with pleasure, giggled Pavel Pavlovich. That is foolish on your part, but I suppose you must be forgiven. You must have seen from that boy's behavior that I play no part in this matter. Others are the principal actors, not I. At all events the job had attractions for you. Pavel Pavlovich sat down and poured out a glass of wine. You think I shall knuckle under to that young gentleman? Pooh! I shall drive him out tomorrow, sir, like dust. I'll smoke this little gentleman out of his nursery, sir, you see if I don't. He drank his wine off at a gulp, and poured out some more. He seemed to grow freer as the moments went by. He talked glibly now. Ha ha! Sachinka and Nadianka, 2 darling little children. Ha ha ha! He was beside himself with fury. At this moment, a terrific crash of thunder startled the silence, and was followed by flashes of lightning and sheets of heavy rain. Pavel Pavlovich rose and shut the window. "The fellow asked you if you were afraid of the thunder, do you remember?" "Ha ha ha! Velkarninov afraid of thunder? And all that about 50 years old wasn't bad, eh? Ha ha ha!" Pavel Pavlovich was in a spiteful mood. "You seem to have settled yourself here," said Velkarninov, who could hardly speak for agony. "Do as you like, I must lie down." "Come, you wouldn't turn a dog out tonight," replied Pavel, glad of a grievance. "Of course, sit down, drink your wine, do anything you like," murmured Velkarninov, as he laid himself flat on his divan, and groaned with pain. "Am I to spend the night? Aren't you afraid?" "What of?" asked Velkarninov, raising his head slightly. "Oh, nothing. Only last time you seemed to be a little alarmed, that's all." "You are a fool," said the other angrily, as he turned his face to the wall. "Very well, sir, all right," said Pavel. Velkarninov fell asleep within a minute or so of lying down. The unnatural strain of the day, and his sickly state of health together, had suddenly undermined his strength, and he was as weak as a child. But physical pain would have its own, and soon conquered weakness and sleep. In an hour he was wide awake again, and rose from the divan in anguish. Pavel Pavlovich was asleep on the other sofa. He was dressed, and in his boots, his hat lay on the floor, and his eyeglass hung by its cord almost to the ground. Velkarninov did not wake his guest. The room was full of tobacco smoke, and the bottle was empty. He looked savagely at the sleeping drunkard. Having twisted himself painfully off his bed, Velkarninov began to walk about, groaning and thinking of his agony. He could lie no longer. He was alarmed for this pain in his chest, and not without reason. He was subject to these attacks, and had been so for many years, but they came seldom, luckily, once a year or 2 years. On such occasions, his agony was so dreadful for some 10 hours or so that he invariably believed that he must be actually dying. This night, his anguish was terrible. It was too late to send for the doctor, but it was far from morning yet. He staggered up and down the room, and before long his groans became loud and frequent. The noise awoke Pavel Pavlovich. He sat up on his divan, and for some time gazed in terror and perplexity upon Velkarninov, as the latter walked moaning up and down. At last he gathered his senses, and enquired anxiously what was the matter. Velkarninov muttered something unintelligible. "It's your kidneys, I'm sure it is," cried Pavel, very wide awake of a sudden. "I remember Peter Kuzmich used to have the same sort of attacks." "The kidneys, why, one can die of it. Let me go and fetch Mavra." "No, no, I don't want anything," muttered Velkarninov, waving him off irritably. But Pavel Pavlovich, goodness knows why, was beside himself with anxiety. He was as much exercised as though the matter at issue were the saving of his own son's life. He insisted on immediate compresses, and told Velkarninov he must drink 2 or 3 cups of very hot weak tea, boiling hot. He ran for Mavra, lighted the fire in the kitchen, put the kettle on, put the sick man back to bed, covered him up, and within 20 minutes had the first hot application all ready, as well as the tea. "Hot plates, sir, hot plates," he cried, as he clapped the first, wrapped in a napkin, onto Velkarninov's chest. "I have nothing else handy, but I give you my word it's as good as anything else. Drink this tea quick, never mind if you scald your tongue, life is dearer. You can die of this sort of thing, you know." He sent sleepy Mavra out of her wits with flurry. The plates were changed every couple of minutes. At the third application, and after having taken 2 cups of scalding tea, Velkarninov suddenly felt decidedly better. "Capital, thank God, if we can once get the better of the pain it's a good sign," cried Pavel, delightedly, and away he ran for another plate and some more tea. "If only we can beat the pain down," he kept muttering to himself every minute. In half an hour the agony was past, but the sick man was so completely knocked up that, in spite of Pavel's repeated entreaties to be allowed to apply just 1 more plate, he could bear no more. His eyes were drooping from weakness. "Sleep, sleep," he muttered faintly. "Very well," consented Pavel, "go to sleep. Are you spending the night here?" "What time is it?" "Nearly 2. You must sleep here." "Yes, yes, all right. I will." A moment after the sick man called to Pavel again. You, muttered the former faintly, as Pavel ran up and bent over him, "you are better than I am." "I understand all, thank you." "Go to sleep," whispered Pavel Pavlovitch, as he crept back to his divan on tiptoes. Velkarninov, dozing off, heard Pavel quietly make his bed, undress and lie down, all very soft.